Also, as a reminder, for more Microsoft Webcasts, you can visit microsoft.com/webcast. And again, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's Msdn Webcast, Windows PowerShell and Microsoft Management Console. It's my pleasure to introduce today's presenter. We have Matt Hester joining us today. Matt is an IT pro evangelist here at the Microsoft Corporation. And now, without any further delay, I'm going to turn the floor over to Matt.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Once again, everybody, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Thanks for tuning into this webcast. Well, we're going to talk about PowerShell. Now, you probably heard my title and it's like, wait, this is not a developer? No, I'm an IT pro. Because one of the great things about PowerShell, this is what I would call one of those gray area technologies where it kind of delves into both a little bit of knowing that developmental experience is going to help you tremendously, but you have to know how that command line interface works, which hopefully most of you, if you've ever done WMI scripting, or if you've ever done any the kind of a localized scripting on machines, you probably have a step ahead of the game when it comes to learning PowerShell. But for all intents and purposes, PowerShell is just another language that, just like you learn with C# and all the different languages like VB that you've used in the past, you just have to learn how to talk to it. And once you learn how to talk to PowerShell, you're going to be, in my opinion, simply amazed with the types of things that you can do. I found that with PowerShell, pretty much anything that I could do with scripting in the past or anything I could do with the GUI in the past, guess what? I can now do with PowerShell. So today what we're going to do over the next little while, and I'm going to hopefully leave hopefully 15 minutes towards the end for just some questions that hopefully you'll have today, is kind of take you through a tour of PowerShell. Kind of just start off with an introductory for the folks that haven't seen it. We'll find out kind of where we're at here in just a moment. But I want to kind of give you just a place to jump off at where you can actually start learning on your own. Now, one of the common questions that we get in this and the webcast that we do here is, where can I get the question and answer log? Well, you're certainly welcome to copy and paste the Q&A log as we go through today inside the environments. What I'll do, and I usually get them off anywhere between 7 to 10 days from the end of the webcast. I'll scrub the Q&A log that we'll have today, and I'll post it on my blog, which you see on the screen today, blog.technet.com/MatthewMS. That's my blog, but I'm also going to put some resources for you to look into it and to really give you some time to dive in, because I could spend just an hour just talking about all the ways we can hook in with Visual Studio into the PowerShell environment. But I find with this environment, it's a much better kind of concept if you're going through it at your own pace. So one of the links I'm going to put up on my blog for everybody is, where can you get the virtual lab where you can go out and actually play with this up on a Microsoft, Windows 2008 server, and actually work with PowerShell in a native Visual Studio environment and actually work with things and making those commands call. So we're going to talk about that kind of stuff today, but I'm really going to encourage everybody to spend that time, because I think it's almost a 2-hour virtual lab just on that concept alone. Some amazing stuff for you to take a look at. I'll touch on some of the things that are in those labs here in just a little bit. So today we're just going to kind of take you through a step through what are some of the basics of PowerShell. What are some of the snap-ins? What's this concept known as a commandlet? And we'll hit that right away. It's one of the major basics. And then also, what are some of the providers that you can actually use to write and develop to really draw out some of the other capabilities that we have inside of PowerShell? It's very tough for me when I talk about PowerShell not to say, unlock the power of PowerShell. To me, that's just the Department of Redundancy, right? But it really is an incredibly powerful language that we can use inside of our environments. So to kind of help me out a little bit, have you used PowerShell, or formerly known as Monad, which was the code name? And if you've used it, have you used it just kind of in limited mode? Maybe you just kind of played with it inside the actual command prompt environment? Have any of you actually played with it inside of VS? Have any of you actually played with it inside of Visual Studio and called your commands from the environment? It looks like I have at least one person out there that's there. And, I always make the joke, PowerShell, it's the new eggshell, right? I see all those commands where they throw the eggs off the buildings, or all those contests, and try not to bake the egg. PowerShell can't be used for that. So it looks like a few of you have just only used it kind of in limited and kind of limited fashion. So hopefully I'm going to give you some food for thought as we go through today, to give you some of the different examples and things that you can possibly try to work with it. But you definitely want to start looking at it from a language, learn it from a native mode, and then start learning about what we can do to instantiate those commands inside of Visual Studio applications. So what are some of the basics that we have that we can use in PowerShell? Really, there are 4 commands that you can just drive anything you want. You learn these 4 commands, you can really discover everything you need to know about PowerShell and the types of capabilities. Now, these 4 commands you see here, we have the verb get and we have the noun of what you're trying to get, right? It's standard kind of verb-noun relationships in our commands. But these 4 commands are what are referred to as commandlets. Just think of commandlets as just little simple single-function command lines that can do a certain function. And there's several hundred inside of the PowerShell, and that's what Get Help's there to do, show you how to work with it. The fantastic thing about these, when you look at the commandlets just by themselves, they're not very sexy, right? They do a single function. But the great thing about these commandlets is that you can pipe them together to really do a lot of complex types of functions, where they allow us to really bring these things together. When you look at these verb-noun pair formats, some of you might be thinking, hey, wait, that looks something like the .NET that I'm used to coding to, and the types of classes that we have in .NET to work with. In reality, folks, these are actually derived from .NET classes that we can actually work with inside the environment. Really, the verb part identifies the action, right? The noun identifies what we're going to be performing that action on top of, just like we do with a lot of our code, right? The goal in these naming conventions with commandlets is really just to keep it a list of verbs and nouns consistent. Stop as opposed to halt, terminate, or so on. Stop process, stop service. We're not going to give you different verbs based on what you're trying to turn off. It's just going to be stop, or it's just going to be get if you want to find out more information about something that you want to do inside of here. The Get Help, pretty obvious what that commandlet does. Helps us learn more about the environment, actually see what's there. The Get Commandlet command allows us to see what available commands are available inside the PowerShell. And I'll run a couple of these to kind of get you into that kind of the realm for the environment. You can also allow you to say, hey, I just want to see which commands I can run with get. What if I just want to see what commands I can run with that verb get? I'll show you how to run that as well, just to kind of give you an idea of what's there. The PS drive just allows us to show you what drives we have on there, the system drives, but they also include registry and certificate and other data store drives. So Get PS drive is going to give you a little bit more than just drives. You'll see this run in just a few minutes. Get member, when I first showed this and started talking about what you could do with it, most of the developers that I spoke to at the time went, oh my, I can really do this. Get member allows you to see the different methods and properties available on any object in PowerShell that we can run. So let's say you wanted to run PowerShell that brought up the different processes in our environment. What could you do with those processes via PowerShell? Well, the Get member is going to be able to show you all those properties and methods. But it's much more than just localized system. You can actually, depending on the nature of applications that you have, most of the applications, right, have methods and properties. Internet Explorer being just an example coming off the top of my head. You can actually bring in, you can actually run a version or an instance of Internet Explorer in the PowerShell environment, but then you can also get the members so you can see all the properties and methods that you can manipulate of IE from within inside the PowerShell. They allow you to control and configure those environments. So we're going to do some of these commands to kind of give you a flavor for how they work. But we also have several different types of switches that we can use when we're working with PowerShell. In addition just to kind of doing some of the basic kind of things that we can do to tie the commands together, there are debugging and tracing switches, basically with debug and verbose switches can be used to help you write these types of commands. Commandlets can basically write their debug information by simply calling a write debug or a write verbose. It's just going to be string text kind of entries for you to work with. You can even do some basic error handling here, where you can just do some basic, tracking of how those errors are working on, and do you want things to kind of work with, like the error variable. I think, what's that for? Well, that's where you can say, you know what? If I do have an error, one of the variables, let's do a silently continue. So depending on the nature of what's going on, you can do these types of things. We also have some more powerful commands around what if. You can do a lot of what if scenarios. In other words, you can say, okay, stop process dash what if. What happens if I stop all the process? What's going to happen inside the environment? We won't actually run it, but allows us to work with it and actually see how those commands are tied together. But really, at the end of the day, one of the things that I mentioned earlier is the true ability to do complex things inside of PowerShell comes from being able to do what is called pipelining the commands together. being able to combine a couple of just the simple commands like the sort verb and the get verb to bring out data and actually work with it and sort the data inside our environments. And really at the end of the day, these are the types of things that you want to be able to know how to do to start the basics of the learning the environment. Now I'm going to show you a couple other things as we reach into our demo here to kind of get you started with the basics. All right, so we're just going to show you in this first little demonstration just some of the simple things that we can do in PowerShell. So I'm just bringing up a virtual PC. This is a Windows 2008 server. I believe, I don't even know if I've updated this one. This might either be, it's either the February CTP or one of the other versions, but it's a basic, simple, straightforward VPC. It has PowerShell inside of it, which, by the way, folks, everything I'm getting ready to show you, definitely 2008 has a lot of things you can work with. PowerShell is a free download. You can actually bring this down to your 2003 and your XP systems. I think it's 2003 Service Pack 2 or later and XP Service Pack 1. It's a free download. If you have Windows Vista systems and you want to play with it on a Vista system as well, you can. It's a free download for that. Windows Server 2008 will actually have PowerShell built into it natively, so it'll already be there for you to work with. It does require the .NET 3.0 framework to be installed for it to work, but if you go up to the website, it'll give you all those specs, and I'll put a link to my blog to where you can actually download and work with it. There's a lot of books out there if you want more. There's an O'Reilly Press book, there's an MS Press book, a couple other things to really dig into it and play with it. I think from a standpoint, especially in today's conversation, there's a lot of things we can do, but I could have done this PowerShell demonstration on my Vista host if I wanted to. I like to have a little bit of fun with it, but you can definitely do it. And just as a trivia question, Exchange was the very first program to have PowerShell built into it. Exchange 2007 specifically actually had PowerShell natively built into it, and the Exchange product group actually built several commandlets to do Exchange-specific things, like making mailboxes, moving mailboxes, that kind of stuff. In other words, when you look at the commandlet framework that we have here, folks, you can create your own commandlets in addition to what you're going to see here inside the environment. So one of the things we can always do is just, the basic help commands to find out what's going on inside of our environments. And I forgot my verb. Oh, there it is. Where I can actually just get what are some of the different objects I can learn more about. I can also do a get command if I want to see what's actually there, what kind of commandlets are built in. Here's a list of all the commandlets that we have built into the environment. Stop service, stop process. We can do a lot of these types of things to see what's there. And if I go up to the get, notice that we have a lot of commands for getting permissions, getting the different members of the properties, which we're going to do, getting the different processes. Really, you can run the get command on most objects inside of the PowerShell environment and actually work with it. Now, a couple things about this. Let me go ahead and scroll down. Let's do a quick clear screen. If I type in a get, and I just type in the letter A. Now I know this probably won't impress most of you, but I have tab auto-completing inside of it. Now I know a lot of you are probably saying, Matt, well, wait a second. We have, IntelliSense to be able to type with inside of our Visual Studio apps. Does PowerShell have IntelliSense? Unfortunately, it does not. I do not know if they'll have any future versions that will have it built into it. I would agree it would be something very nice to have it, but it doesn't currently have that built into the PowerShell. But this is where, when you start working with Visual Studio, guess what? You can call PowerShell objects and actually work with all those commandlets inside of a Visual Studio environment, which means you do get a drop-down, especially when you start doing complex processes or making your commandlets. To write them more effectively, you'll probably do them outside of the PowerShell environment. But could you do everything just by writing lines inside of PowerShell? Absolutely yes. I'll post a link to a wonderful blog out there. The guy's official name, I'm convinced, is the PowerShell guy. Brilliant blog around the different types of things you can do with PowerShell. Kind of things that he does, and I don't know if he actually posted the code for us, but he showed it to me. He shared it with me. He actually made a commandlet that made a GUI for PowerShell. So does everybody follow that? He made a commandlet to open up a window that would allow you to run PowerShell commands. There's even Vista sidebar gadgets out there to run PowerShell natively out of it. So you can get to that in lots of different ways, incredibly powerful types of languages. So one of the commands I want to run today is just get process. What does it actually show you? It just basically shows you all the different running processes that I have inside of my environment. More importantly, what if you want to see what types of things can you do? So if I do a get process and I add in another git command, which is just git member. I want to see all the different methods and properties I can do here. Notice now I can see all those different methods and properties that I can run on the different processes that I have inside of here. So what types of basic methods can I perform on some of the processes that are running? You know, like getting the processor time, getting the total time, just getting utilization, kill switching to actually kill certain processes that we have, which has been the standard kind of around that environment. Now, when I first did these commands, I thought the same thing that probably some of you are thinking right now. This is great. Is there more? You know, I don't want to try to read the command line window and scroll up and down to see what's there. Can I get this information outputted somehow? Well, first off, there's tons of links up on the Msdn sites, tons of links off the Powershell guys or the scripting guys' websites on the documentation behind these commands, but there's a whole realm of online help. But one of the things you can actually do is if you want to put this into a format where you want to actually read it, you can actually just put a greater than symbol and just tell it where you want the file. So I'm just going to say, we'll say process, proc.txt, and I can actually make a little text file. And what it'll do is it took all that output, instead of showing it to me on my screen, it simply sent it into a text document that I can go into Visual Notepad and actually open it up. There's my proc file. Oh, and it didn't get it. Oh, you know why? You guys are going to laugh. Actually, it should have gotten all that stuff. Never works when I need it to work. We'll get this command to work here in a second here. We'll come back. Oh, I know what it is. We'll play with it here in a moment. But basically, command, guess what you can do is you can get all these processes. We're going to try one more switch on it because it should have just worked. It created a text file. Hey, I'm happy about that part. Let's just do this. I want to make sure it's working because it does not appear to be happy right now with me. This is where I get to say, hey, this is beta. Okay, that one looks like it actually went a little bit better. There we go. And for some reason, it didn't show my member for some switch. Probably I forgot the pipe command. But notice what I can do is I can output pretty much the results of any of these commands just by doing a simple command switch and sending it to a text file, just a simple greater than symbol to set that up for me. Now, the great thing about this is that if I go to Git process, notice it showed me a table of a little bit of everything that I wanted. Pretty much any time you do these types of Git commands, you can actually say, you know what, let's sort them just by doing a sort object. So notice the pipe symbol. Make sure there's a space. It is finicky about spaces, as you'd imagine. And handles. Oops. Oh, and I will say I am a horrible spelling person, so. Oh, everybody's going, you forgot to spell it right, Matt. There we go. There we go. So now I can actually sort it by the actual object handle or the name that we have. A lot of these commands that you want to do these types of things are sorted by the handle ID, I should say. You do have to kind of know what that output natively looks like to be able to say, you know what, I only want to see certain commands. So maybe I just want to see the name and maybe the handle level that I have. One of the things you can do with any of these commands, so let's sort it by handles again, but this time what we can do is run the format verb, tie it into the list, and say, you know what, format the list that I'm going to get by, I'm going to sort it by object handles, but I only want to see the name and the handles for the actual objects that are going to be there. And notice now that comes up and shows me that information. And this one, if I actually do this one should work. And we'll just do proc2.txt. And if I come in here, I should have my proc2 file. And just like that, I can type out those and output it. Now, there are some additional commandlets you can get. You can output this data into native XML if you wanted to, HTML, Excel charts, CSV files. There's lots of different choices other than text to send these files out into it. Just a matter of loading. There's some gadgets that are out there to help you do those types of things. But really, at the end of the day, it's up to you to kind of decide of what you want to do to run those different commands. And if you ever need help, you can just say, you know, git command, and it's going to get that environment. And if I want to find out more about, I don't know, the trace command, or I can say git help, pipe it into, let's say, test path. I believe this is the command. Oh, and it tells me right now nothing's on for that one, which is fine. I picked probably a wrong one. But the point is you can get help on any of these commands just by running that help switch to find out more. Really your best bet is there's tons of great online documentation up there for you to take a look at. and actually work with. So definitely spend some time to work with that environment. So let me head back into the webcast for a moment. Hopefully you like that, or hopefully you're seeing some of those exciting things that we can do. What are some additional things that we can to work with? First off, one of the things you have to understand is if you make your own kind of commandlets, what do you have to worry about? Snap-ins are basically, the PowerShell snap-ins are basically the way that you install your commandlets and the supporting types and information of the PowerShell engine. So if you make your own commandlet to do a various function or whatnot, you're going to have to get it installed via the snap-in. When you're going to install all commandlets in the same assembly as a snap-in, then you need to derive basically the PS snap-in process for us to work with. If you want to have more control and register specific items, then you need to go into the custom PSS snap-in. There's tons of applications around this, and I believe it's one of the actual labs that goes into quite detail of how you actually do this. You actually make a, most of you are familiar with the Dinner Now example, you basically extend that via PowerShell and have some fun with it in the actual virtual lab. In the shell, when you add in that specific snap-in instance, you basically just add the commandlet, the provider from the snap in the shell. You basically save that information for you to be able to use and reload later to work with. And depending on the nature of it, you may not even have to reload that snap into a different environment. But at the end of the day, what it allows us to do is really control how those are installed and deployed. And really, if you wanted to, you could package them up into an MSI file and then shoot them out, have your IT manager shoot them out via group policy or an MSI or just a simple login, because most commandlets are fairly simple or fairly small depending on the nature of what they're actually going to be doing inside the environment. If you want to build your own snap-in, I'm going to show you an example of one here in just a second. It's pretty straightforward, but to work with this, you simply, in order to build a snap-in, you simply subclass PS snap-in, implement some whatever properties you want to do, then add in the run installer attribute to the class. This basically instructs the install util.exe, this is from, most of you probably know it's from the .NET SDK, to run the snap-in classes installer. The base class does all the work of registering your commandlets and all that, etc. So you can really just tie into some basic things that you've probably done in the past inside there. And to add in the different public properties, what can you do here? It can either be standard strings or it can be support localized information about the snap-in. The information is visible in the shell so that users of the shell can see the snap-in is available and get information about what it provides and what it actually does. You basically control kind of what get help looks like, what kind of methods can we expose, what kind of things you're going to be doing depending on the nature of the snap-in that you actually create to work with it. Now here's an example of just a snap-in to do that get process and actually return the process inside the environment. It basically does a get proc to find out what's going out inside there, basically using variables and so on. But this is just a simple example of how you'd make that snap-in and how to actually install commandlets. But notice, aside from some of the public properties that we're getting, notice that we're just putting in the proper commands, the get commands, to be able to pull that information out via the PowerShell. Now, the snap-in, obviously, to make it work on those systems, guess what has to be installed on those systems? PowerShell. Actually has to be able to be there for us to work with inside the environment. Makes sense, right? If you want to run a PowerShell command on those systems, you can do it. And in most cases, like for example, maybe you want to manipulate Active Directory inside your environment and you're on a workstation to work with, because you can. PowerShell will actually allow you to do various things like add users, modify groups, that kind of stuff. Pretty much anything we can do with the GUI managed for Active Directory. Well, how does it actually work? Well, depending on the nature of the command you're going to run, in most cases, you're going to have to load PowerShell on top of that Active Directory domain controller server that we have, or talk to people about what you're trying to do to make sure that they're aware of what's happening inside the environment. So you are going to have to talk to your IT pros inside your environment to be able to do these types of things so you can have that flexibility and that power for your business to be able to do those types of functions. So to install the snap-in, it's pretty straightforward. What you basically need to do is subclass the PS commandlet class in most cases, and then basically what building commandlet what installing a snap-in, actually I jumped ahead of myself, just using the install util, it registers the snap-in, but does not automatically add the shell, add it to the shell instance. This is where you'll use the get PS snap-in commandlet, which is a built-in command that we have, to allow you to get all those register snap-ins inside of there that aren't currently loaded. And then adding the snap-in after the fact is just a matter of saying, hey, I've installed it, I've gotten it, so I know it's there, And now let's add in that PS snap in with another built-in commandlet, whatever name it is, to work with, and then export it out to the actual console shell. Once again, using just some built-in commands to work with it. Now to load that configuration that you have, because basically you're modifying the default interface for PowerShell here, you will basically then just load that custom interface to have that custom command shell environment to work with it. So when you start making these classes, you are modifying that environment. Now, you don't necessarily have to do that after it's been registered. You might just have to say, you know what, I have this commandlet, I created it, and I've created this PowerShell kind of environment. But now what do I want to do? I want to be able to just run it. Well, depending on the nature of what you can do, you can just type in a simple, hey, the file is located in the tools directory, so you type in /tools and the name of that file, and in most cases, depending on the nature of the commandlet, it's going to run just fine. But really, you want to go through the process of actually installing and working with those commandlets and snap-ins to make sure they're there. So how do you actually build a commandlet? And this probably is just like building really anything. Once you know the commands you want to do, what do you actually want to work with inside of it? And really what this is, it involves writing a .NET class as an implementation of your commandlet and deploying it. You'll subclass the PS commandlet function in most cases. And by the way, the virtual lab actually takes you through this pretty much soup to nuts to actually work with it. Okay. Now, only if your commandlet does not depend on the PowerShell runtime should you derive directly from the commandlet class. In order to give the necessary information to PowerShell about your commandlet's capabilities, you need to add attributes to your class. The bulk of the logic that comes in the processing methods, being processing, is used to initialize the commandlet for processing. Process record is used to the actual work, and end processing is used to clean up and finalization of code, right? These are the types of processes that you're going to have to call when you actually start working with and creating those commandlets inside of there. Adding parameters begins simply by adding .NET parameters to the custom commandlet class. However, once the parameters are identified, you need to attribute them to provide information to PowerShell about the way in which parameters are going to be called and used inside the code that you're designing. One of the great things about this is that when you instantiate PowerShell and you want to make this as a new project inside of Visual Studio, there actually are a template that says, I'm going to use PowerShell that gives you some of this basic structure, and then you just need to plug in the magic that you want to do inside of there. And then after that, if you look at the last three items, folks, build, install, and test, right? Really, this is, at the end of the day, anytime you make any kind of custom code, what are you always going to do? You're going to build it, you're going to install it in some environment, and you're going to test to actually work with it to make sure everything's working inside the environment properly the way that you would expect to inside of there. So what are some of the things that we can actually do to create a commandlet class? So when you set up when you subclass the PSC commandlet PS commandlet function, what are some of the things that you're actually looking to do? When you think about this, the only time you use the commandlet as the base is if your commandlet does not use the PowerShell engine. Well, how useful would that be? Really, at the end of the day, naming the commandlet is an important part of the process, as the name should be consistent, right? But what kind of other things you can do? PowerShell, as we saw, has a list of a lot of predefined verbs which are defined as enumerated values. These verbs fall into a number of different categories based on the types of actions you might take. What types of categories? There's common types of things. You've seen one today: get, set, add, new, remove, those types of things. There's communication, connect and disconnect. There's data, things like backup, compare, convert. Diagnostics, debug we've talked about. Life cycle of processes, start, stop. Life cycle of applications, install, uninstall. Security, you can actually modify grant and block lists. There's actually a great website out there, and why I'm thinking of it, if some of you want to see what's there, I'm going to throw it in the Q&A log right now for everybody. Where can I get a list of verbs? Oops, and I need to ask questions. I'm going to put the link into the Q&A log for everybody to actually see and work with inside of there as soon as it comes back. And the nice thing about this is that's just a simple online documentation for us to work with inside of here. So where can I get more verbs? So I'm going to go ahead and ask myself my own question. And I'm going to answer it so everybody can take a look at the link. But that link up on the Msdn website, and I'll put this in my blog post as well, actually has a list of all the different types of verbs that we can use inside of there. Really, at the end of the day, it's up to you to kind of pick those verbs and those attributes that you want to work with and modify. The commandlet attribute identifies the verb and the noun you want to identify in the commandlet. And I think I went ahead just a little bit too quick. So when we look at this commandlet here, notice the commandlet attributes, get proc command. Notice really all we're doing here is identifying and working with this. So an example, the example that you're seeing here is basically using that commandlet attribute to provide the name of your commandlet. Notice that the verb noun pair does not exactly have to match the class name, but they should be similar. So they kind of give you an example of one that, hey, if you want to do these types of things, make it similar. There's also a great list up on Channel 9, a show that actually does Get PowerShell project and item templates. And once again, I'll post the link up onto my blog as well so you can take a look at it. But from that standpoint, there's lots of resources. There's been a lot of people have been playing with PowerShell really since it was in early betas. When you take a look at the types of things, I thought it was funny the first time I started working with PowerShell. O'Reilly already had a book out it, and I think it was all you wanted to know about Monad or something like that, or Monad step by step, right? They were using the original name. Actually, the book is still pretty good today, although there's been a lot of cleanup of some of the documentation inside there, but you can definitely work at it. So what kind of functionality can you actually add to your environment? The processing of command line happens in one of the several things that you're seeing right now on your screen. Begin processing is called for each instance of the command line in the pipeline and allows you to write initialization code. For example, if your command line interacts with maybe a database, pretty much any database you can connect to, or an LDAP store for Active Directory, or other LDAP kind of directory services, you might initialize the connection here with the begin processing so that you don't have to do it for each item past your commandlet. In a pipeline scenario, commandlet might be processing a number of items, right? It's going to do a lot of work. Now, what do we do inside that? When all those items come in, how do we actually work with them? That's where the processing record comes in to help tie that together. And it's basically, it's called for each item past the commandlet. This is where the bulk of the work in the commandlet happens and where you'll write your logic. Whatever custom job you're going to be doing, this is where you're actually going to write it inside the processing record. This method is going to be called every time a new item comes in into that pipeline command. End processing is when all the records you have done have been processed, you're done, and you want to clean up the code. It's important to note that this method might not always get called. If you have resources to clean up, you should implement indisposable and call a shared method to improve your resources in both dispose and end processing cases. So you want to make sure if it's not called, you want to, once again, just good practice, make sure you're ending those processing. Stop processing, a little different here, is called when the user indicates they want to cancel the process, maybe hitting Control-C to work with this. In this case, your commandlet is notified that it should stop all processing and cancel any pending work. This is one case where end processing is not called. So stop processing is going to be there, but it still might be taking up resources in the background. Once again, you want to call that end processing inside there. When writing code for any of these methods that we've seen or talked about, there are several methods available from the base class for communicating with the host and returning data. In order to return data objects to the pipeline, use the write object method. This method basically allows you to indicate whether PowerShell is going to help you iterate over the collection, or if you're returning an enumerable list of items that should be able to be passed to the next item in the pipeline. You'll want to set this value to true, really just to help work with those methods and actually enumerate them a little bit more efficiently or not inside the environment. Do not use Consol. You should never use the Consol read or Consol write or any of the methods of the Consol class. While these may seem to work in a lot of different hosts and a lot of different scenarios, they're not directly related to PowerShell, and they bypass the pipeline processing model. So you don't ever want to use Consol. I mean, if there's one thing you take from today is you're playing with PowerShell and learning more about it, it's that. Don't ever use the Consol method or class. Don't do those types of things. Otherwise, you could have things run amok inside the environment. Which probably brings up a question that somebody may be having. Hey, what's the security on PowerShell look like? PowerShell is not going to let you do anything that you already don't have permission to do. It's going to adhere to the Windows security model that we have built into place. In a lot of instances, depending on what you want to do, you may even have to have administrative level just to bring up the console to work with those types of functions. What kind of things can we do? Just wrap up here a few minutes. What kind of parameters can we actually add? Just a few more talking points. Parameters start out as a standard .NET properties identifying the type and name of the parameter. You can then add properties to control how those parameters are used from the shell and in the pipeline by the PowerShell. Only those properties attributed in this way are considered valid parameters by PowerShell. The parameter attribute provides several properties to work with as a parameter. Mandatory, if you want to indicate that it has to be there. You can indicate position. You can set up a help message. You can indicate value from the pipeline by using a thing called value from pipeline or value from pipeline by name. Basically allows you to specify if and how this parameter can be populated from items based or passed in the pipeline. You can have the parameter directly populated from an input object. In addition to the parameter attribute, there are several other attributes that allow you to control parameter handling. The alias attribute allows a parameter to be referred to a different name. Pretty obvious what that is. For example, you might want to have a property name assembly folder, but wish to simply just call it folder. You can use the alias attribute to define one or more classes for a given parameter. Parameters can also be automatically validated against other common requirements, length, range, set, count. Those types of things allow us to work with it. The nice thing about these attributes that you're seeing here, when you create the template, it actually populates a lot of this. It's just a matter of you to create those properties and those attributes and how do you want to manipulate it and actually work with it. The allow attribute basically allows you to indicate explicit allowance for null or empty values. Do you want to allow an empty collection, allow empty string, or allow null, or some different commands you can do. Parameter sets really allow you, at the end of the day, to define a group of parameters that work together for your commandlet. Using a parameter set, you can actually have a commandlet behave differently depending on the set of parameters passed. For example, one of the commands that we can run is get event log is a commandlet that either lists the logs or it lists the events in the log depending on the set of parameters passed. Very similar to kind of how we work with some of those commands. When you say a get event log, it's going to bring back everything, but maybe you only want a subset of that. Well, this built-in commandlet is a good example of how I can pass parameters to it based on the results that only filter and show what I want to see or work with. And really that's what you're doing here, although I imagine the work you'll be doing with your custom commandlets is more significant than just displaying an event log. Each parameter set must have at least one item that is unique to it. This is what identifies to PowerShell which parameter set is being used. Parameters can belong to more than one parameter set using multiple parameter set attributes to include in more than one or no attribute at all, including all the parameter sets. You want to use a thing called you want to use what is called parameter set name to figure out which parameter set is being passed. There's tons of articles, and once again, I'll post a lot of these articles up to take a look at how you actually make parameters, how do you actually make parameter sets to look at inside of our environments inside of here. What are some of the commandlet features that we should know about or should work with or that are supported inside of our environment? There's actually several. And really, at the end of the day, this is just about PowerShell safety. When you're writing the commandlets, you should be sure to support features of PowerShell that help users continue to have a consistent experience. Right? This is just general code, and you want to make sure that it behaves and looks, even though it's your own custom commandlet, it behaves and looks like a native commandlet, so people can actually work with it inside there. The should continue is one to point out as a method you can actually call to prompt the user if you should execute the actions, essentially confirming the action of the user. You get an individual response or allow a yes to all or no to all response. You can work with this. Should process is another method you can call if your commandlet should actually execute its output, much like a should continue. The main use case for this supports the what if parameter. If what if is specified, then should process will return false. In other words, if it comes back false, well, maybe I don't want to do this kind of method. All right. The should continue is not affected by what if, by the way, just kind of a side note. Terminating errors basically is going to cause the pipeline process to be aborted. You can throw terminating error use the throw terminating error method to indicate this type of error. Non-terminating errors are basically errors that you want to report, but they will stop you from processing other records. You can use the right error message, or method I should say, to actually report these types of errors. Let me think of an example here. If you're running a query for each record and the data is expected but not found, you would write the error, but if you cannot connect to the database because the connection string is invalid, for example, then you should throw a terminate error because you're not going to be able to process any records. Makes basic sense of just connections, right? In the interest of consistency with PowerShell, the error categories like the verb names are specified using enumerated value. When reporting errors, you must use these categories to identify the type of error that you want to work with. 3 other methods allow you to provide feedback to the user about what the command was actually doing. Write progress method allows you to provide information to the host about the current progress. In addition, the write debug and the write verbose methods that you see listed there allow you to write trace information that can be viewed with proper switches. And once again, there's some great documentation I'm going to post up there for you to take a look at it. What are some other topics that you need to kind of investigate before you can work with the environments inside of there? I should specify, here's just some examples from finding parameters to input values, of how you can actually check the type and check the name of how they're actually working with. Do these values actually come back the way they're supposed to? What are some other things that you have? What are some Windows PowerShell developer requirements? There's tons of guidelines out there, but we've already talked about them. You have to derive from the PS commandlet or the commandlet, use the standard verbs, use the commandlet attribute, implement should process if you change state, handle errors robustly. These are things that you have to do, right, to really make sure it's work. Recommended you should definitely define parameters or even parameter sets. Support the PS path to allow identifying provider paths. Support pass-through parameters if you have to do that. Use arrays for parameters to allow users to specify multiple objects. Use things like host interfaces for reading and writing data. Create a help file. How many of you actually create a help file out there? Please create a help file, especially for people like me who are the IT pros that have to support and run commands. So I know what it is. You definitely want to do those types of things. But I know most of you do that great work anyways. You guys develop, it's so funny. I tease a good friend of mine, and most of you have probably heard him speak out there, is Bill Steele. I tease him constantly. I'm like, hey, without my server, you'd have no place to put your code. And Bill humbly reminds me, without his code, I'd have no server. So it's one of these synergistic relationships we have to have. Anyways, when you're working with these types of things, you should consider supporting an input object parameter that is the type of object you work on. For example, the stop process commandlet takes an input object of an array to process objects. This allows you to use the get process to get all the processes you want to stop and then pass the results very easily to the stop process command. Design the output of the objects. One of the things that you want to be aware of when you're working with outputting objects from your commandlet, they can be existing objects in the API. For example, there's a get child item commandlet that basically returns system I/O directory information and system I/O file information objects. Basically brings back a directory list. In some instances, it's important that objects you return from your commandlets have properties that can be consumed by other commandlets. Use common names for the properties that you in those objects you want to create, and consider extending your types with common properties that using the type extension. What type of view information do you want? All objects are going to be rendered to the host with the default view. However, many objects have a lot of properties that are not commonly used and should not be displayed to the user. For example, that get process command is a good example that shows me a lot of things about the processes that are currently running in my environment. Do I need to see all of those? Maybe not. Maybe I only need a subset, like I filtered out and said, only show me the name and the process ID that I have running for it, or the handle that I have. Right? Well, guess what? You can do that for your own parameters, your commands, control what's there. Because those get commands, and even when I ran that get process command, there's several other parameters I could have typed into it to show me even more information if I want to it. But have those types of things when you in top of your mind when you're creating it. What do I want to show the user by default, and what do they have to work at to get, or what do they need? They don't need to see it unless something's going wrong, but I still need to provide it available to them. They just have to pass the correct parameter to see that property. There are literally hundreds of different values you can put inside of it. One of my favorite examples here is when you're working with Exchange and you're working with viewing mailboxes with a command which is called get mailbox. There are literally, if you think about a user inside of Active Directory, you think about all the properties that are associated with that user, their name, their phone number, their address, their mailbox name, their server name, where everything resides, how much size is in the mailbox, all that stuff. It's all there with the get mailbox command. But you only see a subset of it. I think by default it only shows you server name and mailbox name, but those are the types of things you need to be aware of when you're working with it. Last thing I want to mention here is read and write of the host. Always use the right host and related write methods and read host to interact with the host. This allows you, when you're calling your commandlets from Visual Studio, for different hosts to process information in different ways and does not force your commandlet to be run from that console. In other words, you can make commandlets that don't need that PowerShell console to actually run and work with it. Last thing I want to mention, and then we will end today, is just what are some of the different providers that we have. There is a wonderful website that lists all of them, just to kind of give you a subset of what's there and what kind of providers you can actually work with. And what exactly is a Windows PowerShell provider? Really, you can look at it in two ways when you're inside of here. To the user, the provider represents a set of stored data. For example, the stored data can be the IIS metabase, the registry, the file system, Active Directory, and the variable and aliases data stored by Windows PowerShell are all data stores. PowerShell provides several providers, such as the file system provider, registry provider, cert store, especially if you're using your own certificates, alias provider, to allow us to work with inside of there. If you want to find out more, you can actually just say get help. And actually, let me hop over there and just show this command to you. I think it's get help about _ provider. So let me hop back here real quick. Let me show this to you, just kind of give you an idea what's there. And it should, I think it's get-help. Oh, what's the command? Oops. Well, I think it's about _ provider. If I got these parameters right, then we're happy people. Oh, there we go. It was right. Hey, I did remember a command today. This is a good thing. You can actually get this information about what providers are there, how we can actually work with it, and how these things are set up, and learn more about what's there. But basically, these are different providers that we can work with inside of our PowerShell commandlets to work with it. So to a user, it means one thing. To you all, as developers, PowerShell provider is the interface between the user and the data that they want to access. From this perspective, each type of Windows PowerShell provider that you can get more information on that you're looking at right here basically supports a set of specific base classes and interfaces that allow the PowerShell runtime to expose certain commandlets to the user in a common way. For example, the set location and get location commandlets that we've built in must work across all the providers so we can see what's going on with those particular types of commands that we have. So I just wanted today to kind of give you a brief tour, and hopefully you liked it, around some of the basics, snap-ins, and commandlets. And I'm going to put a link for you because I encourage everybody. It's a lab that should take you about an hour, hour and a half. So allow you some time where you can actually go in and use some of the default templates. They use the dinner now as an example to actually build your own commandlet, install it, work with it, extend the providers. Today I just wanted to get you thinking about those types of things. But I noticed that we had a couple questions, so I'm going to turn it back to Tracy for just a couple minutes to handle some logistic things. I think they can win some stuff, at least the last time I checked, or maybe not. If I spoke out, Tracy, you can just smack me later. Let me take a look at the questions. So Tracy, if you want to help them get wrapped up as I'm looking at the questions.
You bet. Thanks, Matt. I do want to remind everybody that for more information, they can print a PDF of today's session. To do that, just go to the File menu in your upper navigation bar. Also, I'm going to be posting a survey here in just a minute. If you would all please take a moment to fill that out before you log off. We do appreciate your feedback. And as a reminder for upcoming and previously recorded webcasts, you can visit Microsoft.com/webcast. You can go here to access this webcast, which should be available for download in about 24 hours. Also, if you have any webcast content ideas, something out there you'd like to see and haven't yet, we'd love to hear from you. Please take note of this link here. And for anybody who's interested in receiving a free 14-day trial of Microsoft Office Live Meeting, you'll just want to visit Microsoft.com/present-live. We don't have anything to give away today, but we do have the survey to fill out. You'll just want to follow the link provided there to complete today's evaluation. And Matt, looks like you do have some questions waiting.
Oh, thank you very much, Tracy. Sorry about that. I thought for sure we had something. Anyways, but we will have something. One of the comments is Daniel, I know I've probably seen you in Dayton before, but we're going to be back in Dayton in August 28th, so if anybody's around the Dayton, Ohio area and wants to come and see myself, and I believe Bill's still live and in person, please swing by. I have the information to register up on my blog to work with it. Question from Raymond. Can you use PowerShell to run a query that shows processes and the associated network ports and open files for each process? Yes, you can. I'll have to work on the syntax and the output of it, how it works, and I'll probably have to pipe in some other commands. Because remember, not all processes are going to have network ports open. So I'm not sure how it's going to deal with when I say get all the processes, and if it's a process that doesn't have a network port, is it going to show me the processes or all? I'll definitely provide a way to do that. I will also tell you there's several, depending on what you're trying to do, if you're looking for those things to do via code and kill certain apps, there's some definite ways. I would imagine we're able to get to it. I'll just have to figure out the command for you, Raymond. I'll post it up on my blog. So excellent, excellent question, but give me a little bit to track down on how that command actually works, and I'll play with it, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to be able to help find out what's there. This is actually one of the common things that are exposed through a lot of our MBSA tools, our security analysis tools. It's just a matter of finding the right command switch to do, but I'll find it for you. Good stuff. And let me just get that typed in. And Karen asked a great question. What's the worst thing that could happen if you do use Consol or something else? From a standpoint of you basically could kill your PowerShell commandlet. Depending on what the commandlet was doing, you have the potential of killing the instance of that. Depending on the OS, you could kill the OS. I mean, using the Consol objects can really hose up your parameter. Now, in reality, probably nothing bad is going to happen, nothing invasive as in it's going to kill the commandlet or kill the user system, right? Probably not going to do that. But what could happen is if that processing has not been stopped properly in the background, you could have an application run amok among your processing and take more speed away, and the computer's going to see an impact of speed. And their system could have the appearance of slowing down. So it's one of those things. It really depends on what you're doing. Karen, it's an excellent question, but it could be a big issue depending on the nature of the type of things you have. You also asked a follow-up question. What are some of the worst mistakes you've seen by PowerShell newbies? Not using the Consol commands, no kidding. Really, at the end of the day, the biggest commands and things that I've done is a lot of misspellings. A lot of the PowerShell commandlets, it's going to try to process it or track it down. And if you don't have the parameters spelled right, if you don't have the switches turned out right, things look like they run, but don't. For some reason, I couldn't get you the text file of that get member, and I've done that demo several times, and I just didn't feel like troubleshooting the switch. So really, from a PS newbie, there are some things you can do really bad if you're an administrator. You could potentially delete users, delete mailboxes if you have administrative access in Exchange. But it really is contextual, the worst things I've seen. I've seen people wipe out an entire Exchange store in a demo environment. I haven't seen anything really bad in production because a lot of people use the what if, but that's where that what if command helps you avoid some of those things. My personal ones, you saw them today, is my biggest thing, and I've done this on so many webcasts. I've misspelled them. I just simply misspell those things. I'm like, why is this command not working the way it's supposed to? Oh, I called the wrong verb, or I called the wrong parameter. Example of one I did, I think 2 weeks ago, and this is embarrassing to me, is I was trying to set a parameter for Exchange in PowerShell. I was showing PowerShell and Exchange in the webcast, and I used the get command to try to set the parameter. Now, 10-point bonus question, what verb do you think I should have used instead of get to set the parameter? Yep, it was set. One letter was the reason my command was not working. So really, when you do that publicly in front of a couple hundred people watching a webcast and the many more that will download it, it's kind of embarrassing. But that's probably my personal story. Excellent question, Karen. I'll see if I can find some other things. I'm sure there's probably some KBs out there of things you should or should not do. And I'll see if I can find a better answer for you if they did end up using the Consol, and I'll post it up on my blog. Once again, my blog is blogs.technet.com/MatthewMS. I will see if I can track down some more information. Excellent question, Karen. With that, Tracy, I do not see any more questions. So with that, everybody, I want to say thank you to everybody out there for coming and joining the webcast today. Tracy, I want to say thank you for hosting me today, and I hope everybody had a good time. And with that, have a great afternoon.
Absolutely, and thank you, Matt, for your presentation today and answering all the questions we had come through the queue. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to conclude today's session. I want to thank you for joining us. You may now disconnect from the audio portion of today's webcast.